The air on the command deck of the HSS Starfang smelled of ozone recycled oxygen and the faint, expensive scent of synthetic lavender that the Phalid officers seemed to prefer. It was a crisp, sterile smell, the kind that tried too hard to mask the underlying metallic tang of a warship capable of glassing a planet. Norman readjusted the strap of his heavy toolkit, feeling the sweat prickle along his spine. He hated this ship. He hated the sleek, bone-white curves of the bulkheads that looked more like organic growths than honest steel. Most of all, he hated the way the human crew members, the registered companions, walked with their heads held high, wearing their collars like jewelry rather than shackles. "Keep your eyes down, technician," a voice hissed in his ear. Norman stiffened his hand, instinctively brushing the hidden comms implant behind his ear. It was Margaret. Even across the vast distance of space, her voice carried that peculiar mix of grandmotherly warmth and steel trap authority. "I am looking at the conduit panels, ma'am," Norman muttered, barely moving his lips. "Just doing my job." "Your job is to be invisible until the data stream opens," Margaret replied. "We are hours away from the Crown Ring, the 50th anniversary of the Pet Accord. Do not let your temper ruin 50 years of planning, Norman. Remember what they did to your parents." He did not need the reminder. The image was burned into his retinas, his father being dragged out of their tenement block, in the neon-drenched slums of Neo-Seattle, not in handcuffs, but on a leash, sold off to cover the sector's debt. His mother had gone voluntarily to keep the family together, labeled as a domestic associate. He had never seen them again. Norman was one of the uncollared, a child of the gutters, who had clawed his way up through the engineering academies, solely to find a way to burn the system down. And Margaret, the High Commissioner, the so-called savior of humanity, was the one who had handed him the matches. "I am fine," Norman whispered back. "Just get me the access codes for the Admiral's private server." Patience. The ceremony comes first. The heavy blast doors at the end of the bridge hissed open. The chatter on the deck died instantly. Even the hum of the engines seemed to drop an octave in deference. Admiral Marie had arrived. Norman had seen her on propaganda hollows, of course. Everyone had. But seeing her in the flesh fur was a different matter. She was tall, easily 2 heads taller than the average human, with the lithe, predatory grace of a jungle cat, forced into a bipedal stance. Her fur was a deep, lustrous midnight black, contrasting sharply with the pristine white ceremonial armor that plated her chest and shoulders. Her ears, triangular and tufted, swiveled with radar-like precision, picking up sounds no human could hear. Behind her, a long, sinuous tail flicked back and forth, betraying an agitation that her stoic feline face did not show. She did not walk. She prowled. Behind her came the entourage. And this was the part that made bile rise in Norman's throat. Flanking the Admiral were 2 high-ranking human diplomats, both wearing intricate gold filigreed collars, connected by silk ribbons to the wrists of their Phalid counterparts. They looked happy. They looked safe. They looked like well-groomed poodles at a show. "Disgusting," Norman thought, gripping his toolkit so hard his knuckles turned white. "Technician," a sharp voice barked. Norman jumped, nearly dropping his box. He spun around to see a Phalid security officer towering over him. The alien's slit-pupiled eyes narrowed. "You are blocking the procession path. Move to the maintenance alcove, now." "Yes. Right. Sorry," Norman stammered. He scrambled backward, his boots squeaking on the polished floor. The bridge was crowded. Too crowded. Every section chief was present for the pre-docking ceremony. The Starfang was the flagship of the fleet, and its arrival at the Crown Ring was the opening act of the renewal session. Norman found himself pressed against a bank of secondary monitors, his heart hammering against his ribs. He was supposed to be hacking the localized grid during the distraction of the Admiral's speech. He reached into his pocket, fingering the data spike Margaret's team had fabricated. It was designed to look like a standard diagnostic tool, but inside, It held a worm program capable of eating through the Felid encryption. "Admiral on deck!" the security chief roared. Admiral Marie stopped in the center of the command circle. She placed a clawed hand on the hollow table, her gaze sweeping over the crew. Her eyes were a piercing electric yellow. "Report status on Crown Ring approach," she commanded. Her voice was a low purr vibrating with authority, but the universal translator in Norman's ear rendered it into crisp, commanding English. "Docking sequence initiated, Admiral," the helmsman replied. "We are T-minus 30 minutes to hard seal." "Good," Marie said. "Ensure the shielding is at 100%. The anti-accord protesters are active in this sector. I want no surprises." She turned her back to Norman. She was less than 5 feet away. This was it. The distraction. All eyes were on the main view screen where the Crown Ring, a massive halo-like space station orbiting a gas giant, was coming into view. Norman seized the moment. He pulled the data spike from his pocket. He just needed to lean forward, jam it into the port beneath the console, and look like he was checking a voltage variance. He took a step. His boot landed on a slick, dark patch on the floor. Someone, probably a nervous ensign, had spilled a cup of stimulating nectar and done a poor job cleaning it up. Friction vanished. "Whoa!" Norman yelped. It happened in slow motion. His feet went out from under him. The heavy toolkit flew from his hands, clattering loudly across the deck. Norman flailed his arms, windmilling as he pitched forward. He didn't just fall. He dove, sliding uncontrollably across the polished floor. He came to a stop directly behind Admiral Marie. The noise of the toolkit hitting the ground had shattered the silence. Every head on the bridge turned. Admiral Marie spun around her hand, dropping to the energy pistol at her hip. But she wasn't under attack. She was being looked at. Norman was on his hands and knees. He was disoriented, his face flushed with heat. He looked up. Directly in front of his face, at eye level, because of his kneeling position, was the Admiral. Specifically because she had been turning, he was staring right at her lower back and the base of her tail. The bridge was silent. Dead silent. Norman's brain short-circuited. He was a covert operative. He was a man with a burning vendetta. He was a genius engineer. But in that moment he was a clumsy human who had just made a fool of himself in front of the most powerful being in the sector. His synapses fired randomly, trying to find something, anything to say to break the tension. He needed to apologize. He needed to say, "I am sorry, Admiral." But his eyes were locked on the way her tail fluffed up in surprise. It reminded him, with a sudden bizarre intensity, of a stray cat he had fed in the slums when he was 7 years old. The words bypassed his filter. They bypassed his brain. They just fell out of his mouth. Admiral, your butt looks kinda cute." The word cute hung in the air like a live grenade. It wasn't a whisper. The main command microphone, sensing a voice near the Admiral, had picked it up and amplified it. The sentence echoed through the bridge speakers, bouncing off the walls. "Your butt looks kinda cute." For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then Admiral Marie's ears swiveled backwards so hard they lay flat against her skull. Her tail went rigid. A deep, synthesized chime resonated through the ship. It wasn't the red alert siren. It was something older, deeper, a sound like a heavy gong being struck underwater. A holographic avatar materialized in the center of the room. It was the ship's AI adjudicator, a faceless figure of geometric light. "Verbal contract initiated," the AI announced. Its voice was devoid of emotion, pure algorithmic certainty. Subject Norman Hale, Human Technician Class 4. Object Grand Admiral Marie of the Third Claw. Statement analysis complement of physical feature regarding fur or posterior, specifically using the binding adjective cute. Norman blinked, pushing himself up to his knees. "Wait, what I didn't mean." "Silence," the AI commanded. Referencing the founding scrolls of the Felid Human Compact Clause, 74 Section B. A public declaration of cuteness, directed at a high field by a companion species, when uncoerced constitutes a binding oath of submission. It is an archaic but active statute. The blood drained from Norman's face. He looked around. The crew was staring at him with a mixture of horror and awe. The human diplomats looked scandalized. The Felid officers looked stunned. Marie looked panicked. For a brief second, the icy mask of the Admiral cracked. Her yellow eyes widened, shifting from the AI to Norman, then back to the AI. "Computer," Marie said, her voice tight. "Cancel protocol. The human is defective." It was a slip of the tongue. "Negative, Admiral," the AI replied. The statement was clear. The biometric readings of the human indicate high stress, but no external coercion. He spoke his truth. To reject the oath now would be a public admission that you are unworthy of the compliment, causing a loss of face Category 1 for the Third Claw Fleet. Norman scrambled to his feet. "Hey, I am not taking an oath. I slipped on some juice. I was just rambling." "The intent is irrelevant," the AI droned. "The words were spoken. The pact is sealed." A drone descended from the ceiling. It hovered silently between Norman and Marie. Beneath its chassis, a tray extended. On the tray sat a collar. It was not the decorative silk ribbons the diplomats wore. This was high-tech sleek, made of a dark matte alloy that pulsed with a faint blue light. A neural link collar, top of the line. "Admiral," the AI said, "accept your tribute." Marie stared at the collar. She looked at the hundreds of faces watching her. She was the face of the fleet. She was the hero of the border wars. If she rejected this, if she let a human embarrass her by refusing a gift of submission, the political fallout at the Crown Ring would be disastrous. The conservative factions would eat her alive for being soft on humans. She let out a low, frustrated growl that vibrated in Norman's chest. "Fine," she snapped. She grabbed the collar from the drone. Norman backed away. "No, no way. Don't you come near me." Two Felid security guards stepped forward, grabbing Norman by the arms. They didn't hurt him, but their grip was like iron. They held him in place. "Let go of me!" Norman shouted. "This is insane! This is a violation of everything, Margaret High Commissioner!" He yelled toward the crowd of dignitaries, hoping his mentor would step in. Margaret stood near the viewport. She did not move. Her face was unreadable, a mask of calm concern. "Margaret!" Norman screamed. Marie stepped into his personal space. She smelled of that lavender scent, overpowering, now mixed with the sharp musk of an apex predator. She towered over him. Up close, he could see the intricate patterns in her iris. "Hold still, you idiot!" she hissed, low enough that only he could hear. "If you struggle, the automated defense systems will classify you as a rabid stray and stun you. Do you want to be drooling on the floor in front of the cameras?" "I am not your pet," Norman spat. "According to the law you just invoked, you are," she replied. Her voice was cold, but her hands as they reached around his neck were surprisingly gentle. There was a hesitation there, a tremor of reluctance that didn't match her icy tone. Click. The mechanism sealed shut. A cold sensation washed over Norman's neck as the collar initialized. A heads-up display flickered into existence in the corner of his vision, showing his biometrics, his location, and a new status line owner, Admiral Marie. "Processing," the AI announced. "Registration complete. Norman Hale is now the registered companion of Admiral Marie. All previous duties are rescinded. New directive: personal attendance to the Admiral." The guards released him. Norman staggered back, clutching at the metal band around his throat. It was smooth, seamless. There was no latch. "This is a mistake," Norman whispered. The rage was starting to boil over, replacing the shock. "I will sue. I will break this thing." Marie straightened up, smoothing her white armor. She turned to the bridge crew, regaining her composure with terrifying speed. "Return to stations," she barked. "We have a docking schedule to keep. The incident is resolved." She refused to look at Norman again. "Security escort my companion to my quarters. He is to remain there until I am off duty." "Aye, Admiral." As the guards grabbed him again, gentler this time, respectful as if he were now a piece of valuable luggage. Norman's internal comms buzzed. It was Margaret. "Do not fight them, Norman," her voice said. "You let this happen," Norman thought, screamed back at her via the implant. "You stood there, get this thing off me." "Think, boy," Margaret said. Her voice was sharp, cutting through his panic. "You wanted access to the Admiral, did you not? You wanted to find the weak points in their defense." "I wanted to hack a console, not become a house cat." "You have been given a gift, Norman. A registered human owned by a High Admiral has clearance levels that a technician could only dream of. You are going to be living in her quarters. You will be by her side 24 hours a day. The pet laws require constant proximity for the first cycle." Norman froze as the guards dragged him toward the turbolift. "What?" "It is the perfect cover," Margaret continued. "No one suspects the pet. Listen to me. Swallow your pride. Play the part. This humiliation is your weapon. Use it. Gather everything you can. When we strike, you will be the one holding the dagger inside the castle walls." Norman choked on the words. "Do it for your parents, Norman. Do it for the cause. Stay in that cabin. Watch her. Learn her." The connection cut. Norman was shoved into the turbolift. The doors slid shut, cutting off his view of the bridge of the Admiral's back of the world he used to know. He was alone with two 7-foot cat people who were looking at him with mild curiosity. "Nice collar," one of the guards grunted. "Standard issue but sturdy. You got lucky. The Admiral usually hates people." Norman didn't answer. He just stared at his reflection in the polished metal of the lift doors. A man in a gray technician's jumpsuit, with a sleek, glowing collar around his neck. The Admiral's cabin was not a room. It was a habitat. The guards had deposited him there 10 minutes ago and locked the door. Norman had spent the first 5 minutes pacing, tugging at the collar, trying to find a manual release. There was none. It was bio-locked. Without Marie's DNA or a master key from the registry, it wasn't coming off. He spent the next 5 minutes exploring his prison. It was spacious, far larger than the cramped bunk he shared with 3 other engineers. One entire wall was a viewport, looking out at the stars, currently filled with the looming, majestic curve of the Crown Ring station. The furniture was low and sleek. There was a massive desk dominated by holographic displays. But there were other distinctly felid touches that made Norman wince. In the corner, there was a raised platform covered in soft plush cushions, a sun-basking spot, artificial UV lamps positioned directly above it. There was a vertical structure that looked suspiciously like a high-tech scratching post, made of a self-healing polymer. And the bed was enormous, circular, and filled with what looked like piles of blankets rather than a standard mattress. It smelled like her. That lavender and musk scent was everywhere. "Ridiculous," Norman muttered. He kicked the scratching post. It didn't budge. He walked over to the desk. He needed to focus. Margaret was right, as much as he hated to admit it. He was inside. If he could access the terminal, he reached for the console. Zap. A mild but stinging electric shock jolted his hand. The collar flashed red. "Access denied," a pleasant automated voice spoke from the collar itself. "Registered companion Norman does not have clearance for official systems. Please wait for your owner to assign privileges." "I am going to dismantle you," Norman threatened the collar. "I am going to turn you into a toaster." "Threat detected," the collar replied cheerfully. "Logging behavioral anomaly for owner review." Norman screamed into a pillow. He sat on the edge of the circular bed, his head in his hands. This was a nightmare. He was a revolutionary. He was a soldier of the uncollared. And he had been neutralized by a slip of the tongue and a cute butt. The door chime sounded. It wasn't a request. It was a warning. The door hissed open. Admiral Marie walked in. She looked exhausted. She had removed her helmet, shaking out her mane of black hair. Her ears were drooping slightly. She looked less like a conqueror and more like someone who had just sat through 4 hours of budget meetings. She stopped when she saw him. For a moment, she seemed to have forgotten he was there. Then, the reality crashed back in. Her expression hardened. The door slid shut behind her, sealing them in. Norman stood up. He tried to stand tall to reclaim some shred of dignity. "Admiral," he said. "We need to talk," Marie sighed. It was a very human sound. She walked past him, unclasping her heavy shoulder armor and setting it on a stand. Underneath, she wore a form-fitting black bodysuit. "There is nothing to talk about, Technician Norman," she said, testing the name. "The law is absolute. The registry has already updated across the fleet. If I release you now, I am admitting incompetence. I will not lose my command because you cannot control your mouth. So I am a prisoner." "You are a registered companion," she corrected. She walked over to a wet bar and poured a glass of clear, viscous liquid. "You have rights. You will be fed, housed, and given medical care. In exchange, you belong to me." She took a sip, her yellow eyes watching him over the rim of the glass. "It is not the worst fate. Many of your kind beg for this position." "I am not many of my kind," Norman growled. "I don't want your food. I don't want your housing. And I definitely don't want to be your accessory." Marie set the glass down. She moved closer, her tail flicking with irritation. "Do you think I wanted this? Do you think I woke up this morning hoping to acquire a pet? I command a dreadnought, Norman. I do not have time to housebreak a human." "Then let me go." "I cannot," she snapped. Her voice rose, revealing the stress beneath the calm. "The crown ring ceremony is in 2 days. The eyes of the entire High Council are on me. If I am seen discarding a willing tribute, it will be seen as an insult to the human Felid bond. It will give the Warhawks ammunition to say that humans are ungrateful and need tighter leashes." She poked him in the chest with a clawed finger. It was sharp enough to cut the fabric of his jumpsuit. "You are stuck here," she said, "and I am stuck with you. So for the love of the stars, just sit down, shut up, and try not to embarrass me further." She turned away, marching toward the bathroom. "I am going to wash the smell of the bridge off me. Do not touch my terminal. Do not leave this room. If you need to excrete, use the guest hygiene unit." The bathroom door slammed shut. Norman stood in the silence of the cabin. He looked at the locked door. He looked at the viewport where the stars spun slowly. He touched the collar again. It was warm now, sinking with his body heat. He felt a cold fury settling in his stomach, freezing over the humiliation. Margaret said this was an opportunity. Marie said it was a political necessity. "Fine," Norman whispered to the empty room. He walked over to the desk. He couldn't touch it yet, but he could study it. He memorized the layout, the brand of the encryption module, the slight wear patterns on the keys. "You want a pet," he thought. "I will be the worst pet you ever had. I will shed on your furniture. I will scratch your curtains. And while you are busy trying to manage me, I am going to find out exactly what this Accord is really hiding." He looked at the bathroom door. He could hear the sound of running water. "And," he added, a darker thought crossing his mind, "I am going to make you regret that your butt is so damn cute." He sat down on the floor, cross-legged, and began to wait. The long game had just begun. The first thing Norman Hale realized about being the private property of a high-ranking alien naval officer was that the accommodations were confusingly luxurious. He had been standing in the center of Admiral Marie's personal quarters for 2 hours. The room was not a cell. It was a sprawling, multi-tiered habitat designed for a species that viewed gravity as a suggestion rather than a law. The walls were lined with panels of polished obsidian and brushed steel curving gently to mimic organic shapes. One entire side of the room was a floor-to-ceiling viewport, currently displaying the streaking starlight of slip space travel. But it was the furniture that offended him. To his right was a workstation that would make any systems engineer drool, a triple-interface holographic deck with direct feeds from the ship's core. To his left was a vertical structure made of rough, durable synthetic bark that stretched from the floor to the ceiling. It was unmistakably a scratching post. A scratching post that cost more than Norman's childhood apartment block. And then there was the sun-basking area. A raised platform near the viewport was bathed in the warm golden glow of artificial heat lamps. Piles of silk cushions were scattered across it, looking inviting and ridiculously soft. Norman crossed his arms, the metal of his new collar pressing cold against his throat. He refused to sit. Sitting felt like acceptance. The door hissed open. Admiral Marie entered. She did not march in as she did on the bridge. Her gait was looser, heavier. She carried a datapad in one clawed hand and looked utterly exhausted. She stopped when she saw him standing exactly where she had left him. "You are allowed to sit, Norman," she said. Her voice lacked the command deck projection. It was just a voice. "I prefer to stand," Norman replied. Marie shrugged a human gesture that looked strange on her feline frame. She walked over to the wet bar and poured herself a glass of water. "Suit yourself, but if you pass out from locking your knees, I am not carrying you to the medical bay." She moved to the desk, sat down, and began scrolling through reports. The silence stretched thick and uncomfortable. Norman watched her. He was trapped in a room with a predator, yet she was ignoring him completely. "So," Norman said, his voice echoing slightly in the large room. "What now? Do you want me to fetch a ball, chase a laser pointer?" Marie stopped scrolling. She swiveled her chair around to face him. Her yellow eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in calculation. "Let us establish the ground rules," she said calmly. "Rule number 1. You do not leave this cabin without my direct permission or accompaniment. The ship is filled with 3,000 Felid warriors. Most are disciplined. Some are young and have never seen a human up close. If you wander off and get into a territorial dispute, the law says, I have to put you down if you bite someone. Do not make me do that." Norman clenched his jaw. "I don't bite." "Rule number 2, Marie continued, holding up a second finger. "When we are in public, you walk on my left side, one step behind. Your tail, if you had one, would need to be lower than mine. Since you lack a tail, keep your head level. Do not stare at other officers. And absolutely under no circumstances does your hand touch the collar. It is seen as a gesture of rejection, which insults my honor." "It is a gesture of rejection," Norman muttered. "And rule number 3, Marie said, leaning forward, her voice dropping to a dangerous purr. "You never ever use the word cute to describe me, or any part of my anatomy, in the presence of another living soul. If you do, I will have you reassigned to waste disposal on a mining barge. Am I clear?" Norman felt a flush of heat rise up his neck. "Crystal." Marie held his gaze for a second longer, then turned back to her work. "Good. There is a food dispenser in the kitchenette. It has been programmed for human dietary requirements. Eat." Norman walked over to the dispenser. He expected nutrient paste. Instead, the machine whirred and produced a steaming plate of grilled chicken and synthesized rice. It smelled like real food. He stared at it, feeling a complex mix of hunger and resentment. "Why?" he asked. "Why what?" Marie asked without looking up. "Why the chicken? Why the scratching post? Why treat me like a guest when I am legally furniture?" Marie paused. She tapped a claw against the desk surface. "The Petticord is a complex document, Norman. Yes, it classifies registered humans as companion species. But it also mandates that we provide a standard of living equivalent to a Class 4 officer. You have full medical coverage. You are protected from conscription. You have the right to refuse reproductive assignments. In many ways, you have more rights now than you did as a freelance technician." "I had freedom," Norman said, picking up the fork. "I could walk out a door without asking." "And you could starve," Marie countered quietly. "Or be killed in a border skirmish. The Accord trades autonomy for safety. It is a transaction." "It is slavery with better catering," Norman snapped. Marie did not respond. She simply went back to work, leaving Norman to eat his high-quality chicken with the bitter taste of truth in his mouth. Over the next 3 days, Norman learned that boredom was a more effective prison guard than any laser grid. He was a man of action, an engineer used to fixing engines and hacking subroutines. Being confined to a luxury apartment was maddening. He paced. He did push-ups until his arms shook. He stared out at the stars until his eyes watered. Margaret remained silent. The implant behind his ear was dormant, likely because the Admiral's cabin had high-grade jamming fields. He was cut off from the resistance. On the 4th morning, Marie found him disassembling the food dispenser with a butter knife. "Is the machine malfunctioning?" she asked, standing in the doorway of the bedroom, holding a cup of stimulating nectar. "No," Norman said, not looking up. "I just wanted to see how the heating element worked. It is efficient. Felid design." "Yes, adapted from our field ration warmers." She walked over and watched him work. "You have steady hands." "I was a structural engineer before I was a companion," Norman said, snapping a panel back into place. Marie sipped her drink. "I have a problem with the localized shield generator on my personal shuttle. The diagnostics are green, but the harmonic resonance is off. It gives me a headache when I fly." Norman looked up. "Harmonic resonance usually means the emitter coils are misaligned by a fraction of a millimeter. The sensors won't pick it up because it is within tolerance, but the vibration is real." Marie's ears perked up. "Can you fix it?" "I don't have tools, and I don't have access." Marie walked to her desk and typed a command. "I have granted you limited technical privileges on the local network. Do not make me regret it. The schematics are on the terminal." Norman stood up, wiping grease on his jumpsuit. It was work. It was a problem to solve. For the first time in days, he felt like a human being. He spent the next 6 hours immersed in the holographic blueprints of the shuttle's shield array. He found the misalignment. It was a 0.04 deviation in the aft coil. He wrote a script to compensate for the vibration without needing to physically dismantle the engine. When he finished, he turned to find Marie watching him from her basking platform. She was lying on her side, reading a datapad, looking deceptively relaxed. "Done," Norman said. "I uploaded the patch. Your shuttle shouldn't hum anymore." "Efficient," Marie noted. "You are useful, Norman. A useful pet is less likely to be confiscated by a rival clan." "Is that a compliment?" "It is a statement of fact." She sat up and stretched a long, fluid motion that highlighted the alien grace of her physiology. "Prepare yourself. We are going to the officers' mess for the evening meal. You need to be seen." Norman's stomach dropped. "Do I have to?" "The crew is talking. They say I am hiding you because you are defective. We need to show them that my human is healthy and obedient." The walk to the officers' mess was a gauntlet of humiliation. Norman walked on Marie's left, 1 step behind. He kept his head level, staring straight ahead, but he could feel the eyes on him. The corridor was wide, designed for Felids, but it felt claustrophobic. Passing crew members stopped and pressed themselves against the walls to salute the Admiral. Their eyes, however, drifted to Norman. He heard the chittering language of the Felids, the sharp clicks and purrs. The translator in his ear provided a running commentary he wished he could turn off. "Look at the lack of fur. He looks cold. Is that the one who spoke the oath? He walks stiffly. Poor thing." A young Phalid ensign reached out as they passed, her hand hovering near Norman's shoulder. "Admiral, may I?" Marie stopped. She glanced at the ensign, then at Norman. Briefly. The ensign stepped forward and ran a furry hand over Norman's head, ruffling his hair. "So soft," she cooed. "Like a kitten before the first molt." Norman stood frozen. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to slap the hand away, to break fingers, to shout. But he saw the warning in Marie's eyes. Survival first. "Thank you," Norman forced the words out through gritted teeth. "Move along, Ensign," Marie said sharply. The ensign bowed and scurried away. "You handled that well," Marie murmured as they resumed walking. "I am going to vomit," Norman whispered. They entered the mess hall. It was a cavernous room filled with the smell of roasted meat. In the center there was a designated area for high-ranking officers and their companions. Norman saw them immediately. 3 other humans. 2 were women dressed in fine silks that matched their owners' sashes. They were laughing, feeding bits of meat to each other. The 3rd was a man older, sitting at the feet of a massive Felid gunnery sergeant. The man was whittling a piece of wood, looking content. When Marie sat at her table, Norman hesitated. "Sit," she said, gesturing to the chair opposite her. "Not on the floor. I am not a barbarian." The other humans looked at him. The older man gave him a sympathetic nod. "First week," the man called out. Norman glared at him. "Does it show?" "You still have the look," the man said, chuckling. "The I am going to kill everyone look. It fades. I am Leo. My owner is Sergeant Carr over there. I am Norman, and I am not an owner's object. I am an engineer." Leo shrugged. "I was an accountant on a colony world. Starving, freezing, working 16 hours a day for credits that were worthless. Now Carr feeds me steak. I have a warm bed. I carve wood sculptures, and Carr thinks they are masterpieces. It is not a bad life, son." "It is a cage," Norman said, his voice trembling. "You sold your dignity for a steak." Leo's smile faded. "I sold my pride to stay alive. You will learn the difference eventually." Marie kicked Norman under the table. Not hard, but enough to shut him up. "Eat your food, Norman," she commanded softly. "And stop antagonizing the happy ones. It makes you look bitter." "I am bitter." "Then eat bitter food. But eat." That night, the jamming field in the cabin fluctuated. Norman felt the familiar buzz of his implant. He waited until he heard the rhythmic breathing of Marie asleep in the bedroom before he answered. "Status," Margaret's voice demanded. Norman sat in the dark of the main room, huddled on the floor near the viewport. "I am in. I have access to the local network. I fixed her shuttle." "Good. Establish trust." "Have you found the weakness?" "She is not what I expected," Norman whispered. "She doesn't use the shock function. She let me eat at the table. She treats the collar like a bureaucratic annoyance rather than a weapon." "Do not be seduced by crumbs of kindness, Norman." Margaret's voice turned icy. "That is how they break you. They treat you well enough that you forget you are a prisoner. Remember your father. Remember the collar on his neck." Norman closed his eyes. The image was fading, replaced by the confusing reality of Marie's tired eyes. "I remember. Record her emotional states. We need leverage. Does she have family, a secret lover? Vice, find it. We are close to the crown ring. The plan enters phase 2 soon." "What is phase 2? "You will know when the time comes. Just be the perfect pet until then." The connection died. Norman sat in the silence, feeling dirtier than he had when the ensign touched his hair. He was spying on the only person on this ship who had treated him with a shred of decency. But then, he touched the metal band around his throat. "She owns me. She is the enemy." He repeated it like a mantra. 2 nights later, the argument happened. It started over something trivial, a cultural debate about architecture that escalated into a shouting match about the Accord. "You built a civilization on the backs of species you deem inferior," Norman shouted, pacing the length of the cabin. "You claim to be enlightened, but you are just slavers with better PR." Marie stood by the window, her tail lashing violently. "You think we wanted this? You think the Phalid Empire wanted to inherit billions of hairless, squabbling, resource-draining apes? Then why did you sign the Accord?" "We didn't," Marie roared. The sound was so loud it rattled the glass. Norman froze. Marie took a breath, composing herself. She turned to face him, her eyes blazing. You think we came to Earth with collars in hand? We came to establish a trade route. We were ready to glass your planet if you attacked, yes. But we were also ready to ignore you. She walked closer, towering over him. It was your leaders, Norman. Your High Council of Earth. They came to the negotiation table terrified. They saw our fleet and they panicked. They offered themselves. They proposed the companion species classification. They drafted the pet accord. They sold you to us to buy safety. Norman shook his head. Liar. That is Phalid propaganda. Margaret told me. Margaret, Marie spat the name. Margaret signed the document. I was there. I was a junior lieutenant. I saw her hand over the digital key. She looked me in the eye and said, "Take care of them, they are fragile." She negotiated the surrender of your species' dignity to save her own skin. No, Norman stepped back. She is a hero. She is trying to free us. Is she, Marie asked softly, or is she just managing the herd? She turned away, her shoulders slumping. I hate this system, Norman. I hate that I own a person. It makes me sick. But if I release you, the law says you are feral. Feral humans are liquidated. So I keep the collar on. I keep you safe. And you hate me for it. That is the tragedy of our lives. She walked into her bedroom, and the door slid shut. Norman stood in the dark, his world tilting on its axis. They offered themselves. It couldn't be true. But the sincerity in Marie's voice, the raw frustration, it felt more real than any speech Margaret had ever given. The next morning, the dynamic in the cabin had shifted. The anger was still there, but it was quieter, thoughtful. Norman was working at the secondary terminal when Marie walked out. She didn't say a word. She simply walked over to him, reached out and tapped a sequence on his collar. A soft chime sounded. The red status light on the collar turned to a pulsing amber. I have disabled the proximity shock and the behavior correction algorithm, Marie said, not looking at him. You can move freely within the ship now. Just do not go to the engine room. The radiation is bad for your skin. Norman touched the collar. Why? Because I am tired of being your jailer, she said. And because you fixed my shuttle. Call it a bonus. She paused at the door. And Norman. Yes. Here in this room, you do not have to call me Admiral. Marie is fine. She left before he could respond. Norman sat there for a long time. Marie. It was a human name. He wondered who had given it to her, or if she had chosen it herself to make the humans around her feel more comfortable. He realized with a jolt of panic that he was starting to like her. The arrival at Crown Ring was announced by a shudder that ran through the entire hull of the Starfang. The massive space station hung in the void, like a jeweled bracelet glittering with the lights of 1,000 docked ships. This was the heart of the Alliance, the place where the treaty was signed, and where it would be renewed. Marie returned to the cabin in full, ceremonial armor. She looked regal, terrifying, and utterly miserable. It is time, she said. The renewal summit begins in 2 hours. We have to go down. Norman stood up. He had been prepped by the ship's valet drones. He was wearing a formal suit made of dark velvet with the collar polished to a mirror shine. He looked like a prince or a very expensive prize poodle. I am ready, Norman said. Marie looked at him. She reached out and adjusted his lapel, her claws retracting, so she wouldn't snag the fabric. They are going to parade us, she said quietly. The Warhawks want to tighten the restrictions. They want to classify humans as Class 2 domesticated. No rights, just property. I need to show them that the current system works, that a human can be a companion and still be a person. She looked him in the eyes. I need you to be perfect, Norman. Not for me. For every human who doesn't have an admiral looking out for them. Norman nodded. I understand. But as he followed her out the door, his hand brushed the small pocket inside his jacket. Inside was a small flat module. Margaret had sent it via a drone drop that morning. The key. It was a hacking device designed to interface directly with the central registry at the summit. Margaret's instructions were clear. Attach it to the main server hub during the chaos of the reception. It will upload a virus to crash the pet registry. It will be the signal for the uprising. Norman looked at Marie's back, the white armor, the swaying tail, the heavy burden she carried. He had a choice to make. He could trust the woman who claimed she wanted to save humanity, or the alien who claimed she was protecting him from his own leaders. They boarded the shuttle. The descent to Crown Ring was smooth, thanks to Norman's fix. "Norman," Marie said as the station grew larger in the window. "Yes, Marie. Thank you for not making this harder than it has to be." Norman gripped the module in his pocket. "Don't thank me yet," he thought. "The night is young." As the airlock hissed open, the roar of the crowd washed over them. Cameras flashed. Thousands of aliens and humans were chanting. Margaret was waiting on the platform. She looked small, benevolent, and sharp as a razor. She caught Norman's eye and gave a nearly imperceptible nod. "Do it." Marie stepped out, head high, tail waving. Norman followed one step behind on the left. He was the perfect pet. But, as he looked at the exposed data port on the back of his collar, the perfect interface point for the module, he knew he wasn't going to crash the system to start a war. He was going to crash it to find the truth. He slipped his hand into his pocket, his fingers closing around the cold metal of the device. "Let's see who really holds the leash," Norman whispered to himself. The silence in the Admiral's cabin was heavy, broken only by the low, rhythmic thrum of the Starfang's slipspace drive and the soft breathing of the Felid sleeping in the adjacent room. It was 3 in the morning ship time. The lights were dimmed to a deep amber, simulating a twilight meant to soothe the nocturnal instincts of the crew. Norman Hale sat cross-legged on the floor beneath the expansive viewport, his back pressed against the cold, reinforced glass. The stars outside were smeared into long, hypnotic streaks of white and blue, but Norman was not looking at the universe. He was looking at the invisible architecture of a cage. He had connected the module Margaret had given him, a small, flat wafer of illegal tech, directly into the data port at the back of his collar. It was a risky maneuver. If the ship's internal sensors detected the unauthorized bridge, the collar would likely interpret it as a tamper attempt and deliver a neural shock strong enough to knock him unconscious. But Norman was an engineer, and a good one. He had routed the connection through the collar's diagnostic channel, masking the data stream as a routine firmware update. Inside, his mind projected via the collar's neural link, the pet registry floated like a massive complex fortress of code. It was a digital citadel guarded by layers of Felid encryption that shifted like sand dunes. "All right," Norman whispered to himself, his fingers twitching in the air as he manipulated the virtual interface. "Let us see what you are hiding." The module was aggressive. It did not knock. It burned through the outer walls of the database. Norman watched as thousands of files flashed past his mind's eye. Names, dates, biometrics, ownership transfers. It was a catalog of humiliation, a spreadsheet of an entire species reduced to domestic accessories. He pushed deeper, aiming for the core kernel, the founding terms. According to history books, the Pet Accord was a simple document, a treaty of protection signed 50 years ago. But Margaret had hinted at a darker truth, a hidden clause that proved the Felids had coerced humanity into submission. He reached the central archive. A file pulsed in the darkness of the data stream, Clause 0, Founding Terms. "Got you," Norman thought. He commanded the module to decrypt the file. The progress bar raced forward, 20%, 50%, 80%. Then it slammed into a wall. It was not a firewall. It was a digital signature lock, a master key required to view the contents. Norman expected to see the seal of the Felid High Council, or perhaps the Emperor's personal cipher. Instead, the code that blocked him was distinctly human in architecture. It was old, clunky, based on binary logic that the Felids had abandoned centuries ago. And at the center of the lock was a set of initials embedded in the source code. Norman froze. He knew those initials. He had seen them on the bottom of every relief check, every propaganda poster, every authorization form he had ever signed. Margaret. Margaret. No, Norman muttered, shaking his head. She was forced. She had to sign it. This is just her signature on the surrender. He tried to bypass it, to hack around the edges. But the code was not just a lock. It was a trap. As soon as he touched the perimeter, the system flared red. A counter-intrusion protocol initiated, tracing the signal back to his location. "Terminate," Norman hissed. "Abort connection. You are going to trigger the localized alarm if you disconnect that fast," a voice spoke from behind him. Norman flinched so hard, his head banged against the glass. He spun around. Admiral Marie was standing in the doorway of the bedroom. She was not wearing her armor, nor the bodysuit. She was wearing a loose, silk robe that looked impossibly soft, tied loosely around her waist. Her ears were swiveled forward alert, and her eyes were glowing faintly in the dim light. She did not look angry. She looked resigned. "Admiral," Norman stammered, his hand reaching for the connection at his neck. "I was just running a diagnostic." "Do not lie to me, Norman," Marie said. She walked across the room, her bare feet making no sound on the floor. "I have been awake for 20 minutes, listening to the cooling fans on your collar spin up to maximum. You are running a decrypt cycle on a Class 1 secure server." She stopped, 3 feet from him. She loomed over him, a predator in silk. "If the ship's AI catches you," she said softly, "it will fry your neural cortex before I can even shout a command override. You will be a vegetable, Norman, a drooling empty shell." Norman stared up at her. "Maybe that is better than being a pet." Marie sighed. It was a long, weary sound that seemed to deflate her imposing stature. She looked at the empty space on the floor next to him, then did something that shocked him. She sat down. She pulled her robe tight around her legs and leaned back against the glass wall, shoulder to shoulder with him. She smelled of sleep and ozone. "Show me," she said. Norman blinked. "What?" "If you are going to burn the bridge," Marie said, looking out at the streaking stars. "At least let me hold the match. Show me what you found." You are the Admiral. You are supposed to arrest me." "And you are my companion," she replied, a dry edge to her voice. "Which means your treason is my treason. If you go down, I lose my command for harboring a spy. So we are in this together whether I like it or not. Open the interface. Share the screen." Norman hesitated. He looked at her profile, the sharp nose, the fur along her jawline, the way her whiskers twitched slightly. He realized she was serious. He tapped the collar. "Sharing neural projection to local display." A holographic screen flickered into existence in the air between them. The red warning of the lock was still pulsing. "Clause 0, Marie read. "I have heard rumors of this. The High Council pretends it does not exist." "It is locked by Margaret," Norman said, his voice tight. "She must have put a failsafe on it to keep the Felids from altering the original terms. To protect us." Marie glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "You have a lot of faith in that woman. She saved us." "Did she?" Marie reached out and tapped the holographic interface with a claw. "Bypass the lock. Use my clearance codes. Authorization Marie, 3rd Claw Admiral of the Starfang." The system hesitated. Then, accepting the override from a High Admiral, the red lock shattered. The file opened. It was not a text document. It was a massive database of the original registry, dating back to the first week of the Accord, 50 years ago. "Look at the classification tags," Marie pointed out. Norman scrolled through the list. He expected to see conscripted, or claimed, next to the names of the first humans who were collared. Instead, row after row, page after page, the status read, "Voluntary application." Norman felt cold. This has to be faked. Propaganda. Read the attached files, Marie commanded gently. Norman opened a random file. It was a video application from a man named Elias Thorne, dated 49 years ago. The man looked gaunt, tired, standing in the ruins of a burning city. "My name is Elias," the man in the video said. "I have 3 children. The water riots have destroyed our sector. We have no food. I am petitioning for companion status with the Felid fleet. I do not care about the collar. I just want my children to eat. Please, take us." Norman opened another. Norman, a woman, a scientist. "I offer my services as a registered associate. The Earth government has cut all funding for cancer research. I am told the Felid medical bays are centuries ahead of us. I will wear the collar if it means I can cure my husband." Hundreds of them. Thousands. People who were not dragged away in chains, but who walked into the cages because the cages offered warmth, food, and safety that their own human leaders could not provide. "It was not an invasion, Norman," Marie said softly. "It was a rescue mission that turned into a business transaction." Norman shut the file. He felt sick. "Because you made us desperate, you blockaded our trade routes." "We did," Marie admitted. "We squeezed you. That is war. But we did not force the collars. Your people asked for them. And your leaders, Margaret included, formalized the system because it was easier to manage a population of pets than a population of refugees." She turned to face him fully. "When I was promoted to captain 10 years ago, the council assigned me a human. A young man named David." Norman looked at her. "What happened to him?" "I refused," Marie said. "I told the council that I was a warrior, not a zookeeper. I told them that owning a sentient being was barbaric, a stain on our honor." She looked down at her hands. "They told me that if I did not take him, he would be sent to the nitrogen mines as surplus labor. They told me that by taking him, I was proving that humans could be civilized. That I was saving him." She let out a bitter laugh. "So I took him. I treated him well. And he hated me. Every day he looked at me with the same eyes you have. He eventually petitioned to be transferred to a diplomat who treated him like a toy, because at least the diplomat didn't pretend to be his equal." "So you gave up?" Norman asked. "I learned that you cannot save someone who thinks you are the devil," Marie said. "So when they assigned you to me, I decided I would follow the rules. I would be the cold, distant owner you expected. Because it is easier than trying to explain that I am trapped in this system, just as much as you are." Norman sat in silence. The line between monster and victim was blurring. He wanted to hate her. He wanted to hate the system. But the video of the starving father begging for a collar was burned into his mind. "Wait," Norman said, his eyes catching movement on the holographic screen. "What is that?" A background process was running on the registry database. A ghost signal. "Someone is mirroring the data," Norman said, his fingers flying across the virtual keyboard. "A live feed. Someone is copying the entire pet registry names, locations, owner IDs to an external server." "That is impossible," Marie said, leaning in. "The registry is air-gapped from the galactic net." "Not if they have a physical tap on the Crown Ring mainline," Norman said. He traced the signal. "It is bouncing through a dozen relays, but here. The destination." The coordinates resolved. It wasn't a Felid server. It was a private data haven located in the asteroid belt of the Sol system. The encryption key on the receiving end bore a symbol Norman recognized instantly. A clenched human fist breaking a chain. "True humanity," Norman whispered. "The terrorist group," Marie's ears flattened. "They bomb spaceports. They assassinate Felid diplomats. Why would they want the registry? To identify targets," Norman said, horror dawning on him. "They want to know which humans are collaborating. They call registered humans traitors. They want a hit list." "We have to block it," Marie said. "If they get the location of every human on Crown Ring." "Wait," Norman said. "Look at the funding stream for the server." He dug deeper. He was an engineer. Money trails were just another form of piping. He followed the credits that paid for the massive bandwidth required for the data heist. True Humanity Wallet, received from Pegasus Fund, subsidiary of Aegis Corp, managed by the name at the bottom of the shell company structure, was not a person. It was a blind trust. But the authorization code for the trust was the same one that had locked Clause 0. Norman stared at the screen. The air in the room felt suddenly thin. "Margaret," he whispered. "She is funding True Humanity." Marie looked at the data, her face grim. "Your savior is paying the terrorists who want to kill my people. And yours." "No," Norman said, desperation creeping into his voice. "She must be infiltrating them. She is playing a double game. She is controlling them to make sure they don't do anything too crazy. She is trying to guide the revolution." "Norman," Marie said gently, "that is a child's logic. Look at the data. She is not just funding them. She is giving them the keys to the kingdom. Why would she give a hit list of her own people to a death squad? To create a martyr," Norman realized. The thought tasted like ash. If True Humanity attacks the summit, if they kill a bunch of innocent pets and Felid owners, it causes chaos. It proves the Accord is failing. It forces a war. "She wants a war," Marie said. "She does not want equality. She wants a massacre so she can rebuild on the ashes." "You don't know that," Norman snapped, pulling away from her. "You are twisting it. She loves us. She is the mother of the Accord." "And mothers sometimes eat their young when they are starving," Marie said coldly. Before Norman could respond, a siren screamed through the cabin. It was not the shipwide alert. It was the specific dissonant klaxon of the internal containment system. The holographic screen flashed red. "Alert. Malware detected in local subnet. Behavioral anomaly detected in registered companions. Sectors 4, 5, and 9. "What is happening?" Norman scrambled to his feet. Marie was already moving, grabbing her armor. The malware. It did not just copy the data. It uploaded a command. "What command?" "The Feral Protocol," Marie said, jamming her helmet on. "It creates a false positive in the caller's aggression sensors. It tricks the ship's computer into thinking the humans are attacking their owners." "What happens then?" Norman asked, though he knew the answer. "The automated security drones deploy," Marie said, tossing Norman a magnetic keycard. "They do not ask questions. They stun, first incinerate second. We have to go." The corridors of the Starfang were usually pristine and orderly. Now, they were a war zone of confusion. Felid officers were shouting, trying to override manual door locks. Drones, small, spherical, and buzzing like angry wasps, zipped through the air, their stun cannons charging with a high-pitched whine. "Get back!" A Felid lieutenant roared, shielding his human companion with his own body as a drone swooped in. "Target identified. Human male. Heart rate elevated. Aggression imminent," the drone's mechanical voice screeched. "He is scared, you bucket of bolts," the lieutenant yelled. Marie did not slow down. She moved through the chaos like a white thunderbolt. "Stand down!" she bellowed, her voice amplified by her helmet. "Admiral on deck, override code Alpha 9 Zulu." The drones hesitated, their sensors confused by the conflicting orders from the malware and the Admiral. "Norman!" Marie shouted. "The local node over there!" She pointed to a maintenance panel on the wall. Norman sprinted toward it. He didn't have his toolkit. He smashed the panel cover with his bare fist, ignoring the pain as the plastic shattered. He ripped out a bundle of fiber optic cables. "Connect me!" he yelled at the caller. He jammed the cables against the interface port on his neck. It was a crude, dirty connection. Static screamed in his brain. "I need to clear the cache," Norman shouted over the noise of the sirens. "The malware is looping the aggression signal." "Do it fast," Marie yelled. She had drawn her energy pistol and was blasting a drone that was trying to corner a terrified human woman. Norman closed his eyes. He dove into the ship's code. It was a mess. The True Humanity virus was crude, but effective, flooding the system with garbage data. He didn't try to delete it. That would take too long. Instead, he built a virtual dam. He rerouted the sensor data from the collars to a null loop, effectively blinding the central computer to the aggression readings. Resetting in 3, 2, 1. Norman gasped as a feedback spike hit his neural link. He fell to his knees, his vision blurring. The sirens cut off instantly. The drones stopped mid-air, their red eyes turning back to a passive blue. Threat neutralized. Returning to charging stations. Silence washed over the corridor, broken only by the sound of weeping. Norman panted, wiping blood from his nose. He looked up. 10 feet away, a young human girl, no older than 18, was clutching the leg of a massive Felid officer. She was sobbing, shaking violently. The Felid, a scarred veteran with one eye, was kneeling down, wrapping his large furry arms around her, purring a deep, resonant rumble meant to calm her. "It is okay, little one," the Felid murmured. "I have you. They will not take you." "I didn't do anything," the girl cried. "I promise I didn't do anything." "I know," the Felid said. "I know." Norman watched them. There was no slavery in that embrace. There was no coercion. There was just fear and love. A father protecting a daughter, even if they were different species. He looked around. Other pairs were doing the same, checking for injuries, hugging. The relief was palpable. Norman felt a hand on his shoulder. He looked up to see Marie. She had removed her helmet. Her face was bruised where a drone had clipped her, but her eyes were soft. "You did good, Norman," she said. Norman pointed at the girl and the veteran. "They are a family." "I told you," Marie said quietly. "It is complicated." Norman leaned back against the wall, exhaustion washing over him. The binary world of us versus them that Margaret had built for him was crumbling. It wasn't humans against Felids. It was people trying to live against a system, trying to crush them. They returned to the cabin an hour later. The mood was somber. Marie went to the wet bar and poured 2 glasses of the strong amber liquid she favored. She handed one to Norman without asking. "Drink," she said. "You look like you saw a ghost." "I saw the truth," Norman said, taking the glass. The alcohol burned his throat, grounding him. "Margaret, she almost got them killed, her own people." "For the greater good," Marie said, her voice dripping with irony. "That is what leaders always say." She walked over to the viewport. "I kept you, Norman. I kept you in this cabin wearing that collar not because I wanted a pet, but because I wanted a weapon." Norman looked at her. "A weapon, an argument," she corrected. "I wanted to walk into the council with a human who was smart, capable, and unbroken. I wanted to stand there and say, 'Look at him. Does he look like an animal to you? Does he look like property? Or does he look like a partner?'" She turned to him. "If I treated you like a pet, I would prove them right. If I treat you like an equal, I prove the law is wrong. That is my rebellion, Norman. It is small. It is quiet. But it is mine." Norman looked at the collar around his neck. It felt heavier now, but for a different reason. It wasn't just a shackle. It was a stage prop in a play he hadn't realized he was starring in. "You are not a very good owner," Norman said, a faint smile touching his lips. "And you are a terrible pet," Marie replied, her tail flicking with amusement. "You shed everywhere." A sharp buzz in Norman's ear shattered the moment. It was the implant. Margaret. Norman froze. He looked at Marie. She saw the change in his eyes. She nodded, signaling him to answer. "Report," Margaret's voice came through. It was different this time. Gone was the warmth. It was cold, metallic, stripped of all pretense. "I am here," Norman said. "I know you are," Margaret said. "I know you hacked the registry. I know you stopped the feral protocol." "That was disappointing, Norman. I needed those images of drones attacking humans. It would have made for excellent press." Norman felt a chill run down his spine. You wanted them to be hurt. That girl was terrified. Fear wakes people up, Margaret said dismissively. And I know you found the funding trail. You are a clever boy. Too clever. Why? Norman asked. Why fund the terrorists? Because the Accord is stagnant, Margaret snapped. We have been pets for 50 years. We have become comfortable. The only way to break the chain is to make the masters afraid of us again. True humanity is a tool. I will use them to burn the system down, and then I will build a new one, where we are the ones holding the leash. You are insane, Norman whispered. I am a pragmatist, Margaret corrected. Now, listen closely, Norman. You are going to go into the summit tomorrow. You are going to upload the rest of the malware directly to the main server. You are going to trigger a total system collapse. And if I refuse, check your caller diagnostics, Norman. Clause 79. Emergency neural pacification. Norman, check the internal status of the caller. A dormant subroutine had just been activated remotely. It was connected to the pain centers of his brain. I have the override key, Margaret said softly. If you do not do exactly what I say, I will activate the pacification protocol. It won't kill you, but it will simulate the pain of being burned alive, indefinitely. Until your mind breaks. Norman dropped his glass. It shattered on the floor. You wouldn't, he said. Try me, Margaret said. You have 12 hours until the summit opens. Be a good boy, Norman. Do as you are told. The connection clicked off. Norman stood there staring at the shattered glass. He was shaking. Marie stepped forward. She didn't ask what was said. She knew. She reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder, avoiding the collar. She has the kill switch, Norman whispered. Marie's eyes hardened into slits. The playful banter was gone. The tired bureaucrat was gone. The Admiral had returned. She thinks she holds the leash, Marie growled low in her throat. She forgot one thing. What? Norman asked, looking at her hopeless eyes. She forgot that you are my human, Marie said. And nobody touches my human. She turned and walked to the wall, ripping a panel open to reveal a hidden cache of heavy weaponry. Get your tools, Norman, she said. We have 12 hours to perform brain surgery on a collar that is rigged to explode. We are going to rewrite the rules. And this time, we are not asking for permission. Norman looked at the Admiral. He looked at the determination in her stance, the fury in her tale. For the first time since he slipped on that juice spill, he didn't feel like a victim. Yes, Admiral, he said. And for the first time, he didn't say it with sarcasm. The Crown Ring Station was not merely a city in space. It was a testament to the uneasy gilded cage that humanity had been living in for half a century. As the shuttle from the HSS Starfang docked at the primary spire, Norman Hale looked out of the viewport and saw the physical manifestation of the Pet Accord. The station was a glittering wheel of commerce and diplomacy, spinning slowly against the backdrop of a gas giant. But down on the promenade decks, the social hierarchy was stark. Norman saw humans everywhere. They walked through the diamond glass atriums, sat in open-air cafes, and shopped in high-end boutiques. And every single one of them wore a collar. Some were ostentatious bands of platinum, encrusted with gems that caught the artificial sunlight, worn by humans who walked with their chins high, seemingly proud of their status as cherished companions. Others were discreet thin bands of matte, skin-tone polymer, hidden beneath high turtlenecks, or scarves worn by people who walked quickly, eyes downcast trying to blend into the background. And then there were the shadows. In the maintenance alleys and the lower concourses, Norman spotted humans who had deactivated their collar lights, slipping into no-camera zones to smoke cigarettes and speak in hushed, angry whispers. "It is a zoo," Norman murmured, adjusting the cuffs of his velvet ceremonial jacket. "A very expensive open-air zoo." Admiral Marie stood beside him, checking the charge on her wrist-mounted comp pad. She was dressed in full dress uniform, a blinding white tunic with gold braiding that highlighted the sleek, dangerous black of her fur. Her tail was twitching a metronome of anxiety. "It is a diplomatic summit," Marie corrected him, though her voice lacked conviction. "And, for the next 48 hours, you and I are the star attractions. Try not to look like you are planning a murder." "I am not planning a murder," Norman said, checking the hidden pocket of his jacket where the hacking module still rested. "I am planning a structural reorganization." Marie's ear swiveled toward him. "That sounds like a euphemism for treason." "Only if we lose." The airlock hissed open. A wall of noise hit them, the roar of 1,000 voices, the click of cameras and the thrum of surveillance drones. "Chin up, Norman," Marie whispered, stepping out into the light. "Walk on my left. Look happy. But not too happy. Dignified. Like a well-bred prize winner." "Yes, Admiral," Norman muttered. Woof! They stepped onto the red carpet. The flashbulbs were blinding. A phalanx of reporters felid human, and a dozen other species pressed against the energy barriers. "Admiral Marie, is it true your human is a rescued stray from the engineering corps?" Technician Hale. "How does it feel to be the property of the fleet's most decorated hero?" "Admiral, the opposition party says the accord is too lenient. Will you support the motion to mandatory muzzling in public sectors?" Marie stopped. She raised a hand and the crowd quieted instantly. She projected that natural predatory authority that made knees weak. "My companion," Marie said, her voice amplified by the room's acoustics, "is not a stray. He is a valued member of my household and a capable engineer. The accord exists to foster mutual benefit, not to degrade. We are here to prove that." She placed a hand on Norman's shoulder. It was a possessive gesture mandated by protocol, but Norman felt the slight tremble in her fingers. She was terrified, not of the crowd, but of what this charade was doing to both of them. Norman forced a smile. It felt like cracked plaster. He looked out at the sea of faces and saw the divide. To the left, the associate species advocates, young felids and hopeful humans, holding signs that read, "Partners, not pets." To the right, the conservatives, older felids with scars and hard eyes, flanked by humans who looked like well-fed sleepwalkers, holding banners that read, "Safety in submission." And standing at the end of the carpet, waiting like a spider in a web of silk, was Margaret. The High Commissioner looked radiant. She wore a flowing gown of earth blue, her silver hair perfectly coiffed. She opened her arms as they approached. "My children!" Margaret exclaimed, her voice thick with emotion. She bypassed Marie and went straight for Norman. She pulled him into a hug that was tight, warm and suffocating. To the cameras it was a reunion of a mother and a lost son. Smile, Norman," she whispered into his ear, her voice a razor blade wrapped in velvet. "The camera on Drone 4 has a direct feed to the planetary news. Look grateful." Norman stiffened, but he patted her back. "I am smiling, Margaret. I am smiling so hard my face hurts." Margaret pulled back, holding him at arm's length, beaming at him with tears in her eyes. "Look at you. So handsome. The collar suits you, Norman. It gives you purpose." She turned to Marie. "Admiral, you have polished him up beautifully. The Council is very impressed with your report on his rehabilitation." Marie dipped her head, her ears flat. "He required very little rehabilitation, High Commissioner. He is a man, not a wild animal." Of course," Margaret waved her hand dismissively. "But we must manage perceptions. Come. The VIP suite is prepared. We have much to discuss before the session tomorrow." The VIP suite at Crown Ring was a palace compared to the cabin on the Starfang. It had 3 bedrooms, a private garden with real grass, and a boardroom table long enough to land a shuttle on. But as soon as the heavy doors sealed shut, the atmosphere changed. Margaret walked to the center of the room, tapped a device on her wrist, and a hum of white noise filled the air, a privacy field. The grandmotherly warmth evaporated. Margaret turned her face cold and calculating. "Sit," she commanded. Norman and Marie sat on opposite sides of the table. Margaret stood at the head, looking like a judge. "The situation is deteriorating," Margaret said without preamble. "The protests on the lower decks are getting violent. The uncollared movement has set fire to a processing center in Sector 7. The Phalid High Council is panicking. They are talking about invoking the Emergency Containment Act." "That would mean martial law," Marie said, her fur bristling. "They would lock every human on the station into their quarters." "Exactly," Margaret said. "And that is why we must act." She looked at Norman. "True humanity is planning a strike during the session tomorrow." Norman froze. He felt Marie's eyes on him. "A strike?" "A small detonation," Margaret said casually, as if discussing a dinner menu. "Flashbang smoke, perhaps a localized disruption of the gravity grid. No fatalities intended, but enough to cause panic. Enough to make the Phalids reach for their weapons." "You are orchestrating a terrorist attack on your own peace summit," Norman said, his voice rising. "Why?" "Because the Accord is dying of apathy." Margaret slammed her hand on the table. "Look at them out there, Norman. Half of our people are happy to be pets because it is easy. The other half want to burn it down but have no power. The Phalids are debating whether to tighten the leash or loosen it, but they are doing it slowly over decades. We do not have decades." She began to pace. "I need to prove a point. I need the Phalids to see that if they squeeze us too hard, we explode. But if they give us a little room, we calm down. That is where you come in." She stopped in front of Norman. "Tomorrow, during your speech," she said, "you will not read the prepared remarks about gratitude. You will go off script. You will be angry. You will shout about the injustice. You will act like a man on the edge of violence. You will scare them." "And then?" Norman asked. "And then," Margaret smiled, "I will step in. I will calm you down. I will show them that only a human leader can control a human population. I will use the fear you create and the chaos from the true humanity attack to force the Council to sign the Psychological Protection Amendment. It gives us our own legal courts. It is the first step toward autonomy." "It is a play," Norman whispered. "You are scripting a riot." "I am managing survival," Margaret corrected. "Do you think the Phalids keep us around because they like us? They keep us because we are useful, and because we are not a threat. If we become too dangerous, they will wipe us out. If we become too useless, they will abandon us. I have to walk the line between dangerous enough to be respected and safe enough to be kept." She leaned in close. "I am the villain in your story, Norman. I know that. I accept that. I do the dirty work so you can have the luxury of morality. But tomorrow, I need you to be an actor." Marie stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. "And if he refuses?" Marie asked, her voice low and dangerous. Margaret looked at the Admiral. "Then the true humanity attack might not be so light. And perhaps the malware in the registry that Norman blocked, perhaps it finds a way back in. I would hate to see thousands of humans labeled feral and liquidated because one engineer had a crisis of conscience." It was a naked threat. Margaret wasn't just playing 4D chess. She was holding a gun to the head of the entire species. "I will do it," Norman said quietly. Marie whipped her head around. "Norman!" "I will do it," Norman repeated, looking at Margaret. "I will play the angry pet. I will let you save the day. Just don't hurt anyone." Margaret smiled. The warmth returned, artificial and terrifying. "Good boy. I knew you were smart. Just like your father." She turned and walked to the door. "Get some rest. Tomorrow is a big day for history." She left. The silence in the room was deafening. Marie stared at the closed door, her claws extending and retracting into the wood of the table. "She is a monster," Marie whispered. "She is a politician," Norman said, standing up. He felt drained. "Same thing." "You cannot do this, Norman," Marie said. "If you stage this riot, you validate her power. You prove that humans are unstable and need her control." "And if I don't?" Norman asked. "She blows up the station, or she triggers the feral protocol. You heard her." Marie walked over to the window, looking out at the station lights. "There has to be another way. We saw the file header. We know she led the original negotiation. If we can prove she orchestrated the accord from the start, if we can prove she asked for the collars." "Then she is ruined," Norman said, "and her power over true humanity breaks." "But we need the proof," Marie said. "We saw the header, but we didn't open the file. We need the full recording." Norman looked at the time on the wall display. "It is midnight. The summit starts at 900 hours. The Vault of Originals is in the core spire." "It is guarded by the elite guard," Marie said, "and a triple-layer quantum shield." Norman touched the collar around his neck. "I have a master hacking module in my pocket, an Admiral's security clearance, and a very cute distraction." Marie turned, raising an eyebrow. "Am I a distraction?" "You are the Admiral." Norman smiled grimly. "You can go places I can't. And well, I am just the pet carrying your luggage." The mission to the Vault of Originals was not a sleek spy thriller operation. It was a terrifying, sweaty crawl through the station's service ducts. Marie had used her override codes to get them into the core spire, claiming she needed to inspect the security protocols for the summit. The guards, intimidated by a high admiral, had let them pass into the outer lobby. But the vault itself was underground. "Left here," Norman whispered, consulting the schematic projected from his collar. They were in a ventilation shaft above the main corridor. Marie was crawling ahead of him. It was a tight squeeze for a 7-foot Phalid. Her tail kept flicking into Norman's face. "Watch the tail," Norman hissed. "Watch your eyes," Marie retorted. "We are above the sensor grid. Drop down in 3, 2, 1. She unlatched the vent cover and dropped silently to the floor. Norman followed, landing with a heavy thud that made him wince. They were in the anteroom of the vault. A massive door of solid duranium stood before them. "This is it," Norman said. He pulled the module from his pocket. "The vault holds the physical copy of every treaty the Alliance has ever signed. If the original recording of the Pet Accord negotiation is anywhere, it is in there." He attached the module to the door panel. "I need 2 minutes." "You have 1, Marie said, checking the corridor. "The drone patrol loops every 90 seconds. Norman worked feverishly. His fingers danced over the holographic interface. The code was ancient Phalid hieroglyphs, mixed with human binary. "Come on," he muttered. "Open up." The light on the panel turned green. The heavy gears groaned. The door cracked open just enough for them to slip through. Inside the vault was like a library of light. Rows of crystal data shards glowed on pedestals. "Search for Terra," Marie commanded. They split up, scanning the rows. "Here," Norman called out. He stood before a pedestal bathed in amber light. The shard was labeled Sol System, Species Integration Compact, Year 0. "This is it," Norman said, his hand trembling. He plugged the module into the pedestal's reader. "Downloading to local storage." "Hurry," Marie urged. "It is a massive file," Norman said. "Wait the metadata, it is encrypted." He looked at the screen. The same initials. MM. "She locked the original recording too," Norman said. "But this is interesting. There is a secondary signature." "Who's the Phalid High Chancellor at the time? Lord Kale." "He is dead," Marie said. "He died 40 years ago." "His signature is the key," Norman said. "If we can bypass Margaret's lock using the Chancellor's old override." Beep. A red light swept over them. "Intruder alert," a mechanical voice boomed. "Unauthorized access in Sector Vault." "Run." Marie grabbed Norman by the collar literally and hauled him toward the door. They burst out of the vault just as a squad of security drones rounded the corner. "Halt!" the drones screeched. "Identify!" Marie didn't stop. She pulled her energy pistol. and fired a warning shot into the ceiling, bringing down a shower of sparks and debris to block the corridor. "Up the maintenance ladder!" she shouted. They scrambled up the ladder, lungs burning as laser fire scorched the wall below them. They tumbled into the upper service deck, gasping for air. Norman checked the module. "Did we get it?" "We got the file," Norman said, looking at the blinking blue light. "But it is still encrypted. I need time to crack it. I need a supercomputer." "We don't have a supercomputer," Marie said, wiping soot from her white uniform. "We have a cabin and a few hours until sunrise." "Then we have to work fast," Norman said. They looked at each other. They were covered in dust, sweating and hunted. Marie started to laugh. It was a strange barking sound. "What?" Norman asked, panting. "I am a High Admiral," she wheezed, "and I am crawling through vents stealing history books with my pet." Norman grinned. "At least you are not bored." Back in the safety of the VIP suite, the adrenaline crash hit them hard. They sat on the floor of the main lounge, the hacking module plugged into the room's central processor. Norman was running every decryption algorithm he knew. "It is going to take 4 hours to crack this," Norman said, rubbing his eyes. "That cuts it close to the opening speech." Marie was sitting on the sofa behind him, cleaning her energy pistol. She looked at him. The frantic energy of the heist had faded, replaced by a heavy, somber mood. "Norman," she said. He turned. "Yeah. If this works, if we expose her, the Accord might collapse entirely." "That is the point," Norman said. "But if it collapses," Marie said slowly, "my people might not let yours go. If there is no treaty, there is no protection. The hardliners back home have fleets. They might decide that a free humanity is a threat that needs to be removed." Norman went silent. He knew this. It was the fear that kept him up at night. "Do you think they would do that?" Norman asked. "Do you think your people are capable of genocide?" Marie looked at the gun in her hands. "We are predators, Norman. We are territorial. We protect our own. If the Council feels threatened, yes, they will strike." She looked up at him, her yellow eyes filled with a profound sadness. "And I don't know if I can stop them. I am one admiral. I command one ship." Norman stood up and walked over to her. He sat down on the sofa, ignoring the protocol that said he should sit on the floor. "You are not just one admiral," he said. "You are Marie." She looked at him. The distance between them, species, rank, history, seemed to vanish in the quiet of the room. "I have spent 50 years being told that humans are lesser," Marie whispered. "That you are fragile, chaotic, needing guidance. But in the last week, watching you hack the registry, watching you save those people in the corridor, seeing you crawl through that vent." She leaned closer. Her tail wrapped slowly around his ankle, a gesture of intimacy that Norman now understood meant trust. "I have grown used to you," she said. "I used to hate the sound of your breathing in my cabin. Now I think I would miss it if it were gone." Norman's heart hammered in his chest. He looked at her lips, alien, yes, but the words coming from them were painfully human. "I am not going anywhere," Norman said softly. "Even if we break the collar, I am not leaving." They leaned in. It was instinct. It was the pull of two lonely souls finding an anchor in the storm. Norman could feel the heat radiating from her skin, smell the lavender and ozone. The room turned red. Alert. Alert. Security breach in Sector 4. True humanity signature detected. The wall screen flared to life. A news feed showed smoke billowing from a lower deck. "They started early," Norman said, pulling back. Margaret moved up the timeline. Marie stood up the moment shattered. The Admiral was back. "She wants to increase the tension before the session starts," Marie said, grabbing her helmet. "She wants everyone walking into that hall terrified." Norman looked at the decryption progress bar. 90 minutes remaining. "It won't be ready in time for the opening," Norman said. "Then we have to stall," Marie said. We have to go to that summit. You have to go up on that stage." "And say what?" Norman asked. "Do I play her game? Do I act the angry pet?" Marie looked at him. She placed a hand on his cheek. Her claws were sheathed, her touch soft pads of fur. "No," she said. "You play yourself. You improvise. You buy us time until that file unlocks. And then we burn it all down." The Grand Assembly Hall of the Crown Ring Station was designed to make individuals feel small. The ceiling vaulted high enough to generate its own weather patterns, with wisps of synthetic clouds drifting past chandeliers the size of shuttles. Today, the hall was packed with delegates from over 40 star systems, a tapestry of fur scales and skin, all turned toward the central podium. Above the stage, a holographic screen spanning 300 feet displayed a loop of carefully curated images. A human child, laughing while being groomed by a Felid matron. A human engineer, receiving a medal from a Felid captain. The slogan underneath pulsed in calming blue light. The pet accord, 50 years of protection. 50 years of love. Norman Hale stood on the stage, the velvet of his ceremonial suit itching against his skin. The collar around his neck felt heavier than usual, a dead weight of metal and expectation. The display on the front of the band was active, broadcasting his status in bright, undeniable letters, owned by Admiral Marie. Beside him, Admiral Marie stood at parade rest. She was a statue of white armor and black fur, her face impassive. But Norman, tuned to the subtle frequencies of her body language, saw the tension. The way her ears swiveled too frequently, the slight ripple of muscle along her jaw. She was terrified not for herself, but for him. At the podium, High Commissioner Margaret was concluding her opening address. She was a master of the stage. Her voice, amplified to fill the cavern, was warm, maternal, and laced with a sorrow that felt heartbreakingly genuine. "When we looked to the stars 50 years ago," Margaret said, spreading her arms, "we saw a galaxy of teeth and claws. We were a young species, violent, fractured. We were children playing with matches in a room full of gunpowder. The Felid Empire could have destroyed us. Instead, they took the matches away." A murmur of agreement rippled through the conservative Felid sections. "They gave us a home," Margaret continued, her eyes glistening. "They gave us structure. The pet accord was not a shackle. It was a swaddling cloth. It kept us warm until we were ready to stand. And today, as we celebrate this golden anniversary, I present to you the fruit of that patience." She turned and gestured toward Norman. "Norman Hale," she announced. "A former technician, a man who was lost, angry, and prone to the chaotic impulses of our kind. But under the firm, loving guidance of Admiral Marie, he has found peace. He has found purpose. He is the living proof that responsible ownership is the highest form of love." The applause was polite, restrained. The script was set. Norman was supposed to step forward, act erratic, shout a few angry slogans about freedom, and then be gently calmed by Margaret proving to the galaxy that humans were still too volatile to be free. Norman walked to the microphone. The silence that fell over the hall was heavy. He gripped the edges of the podium. He looked at Margaret, who gave him a subtle, encouraging nod. "Do it. Play the monster." He looked at Marie. She gave him nothing but a steady gaze, her yellow eyes anchoring him. Norman took a breath. "Before I speak as a pet," Norman said, his voice steady and clear, "I would like to speak as a person." Margaret's smile froze for a fraction of a second. That line was not in the script. "I was supposed to come up here and scream," Norman continued, looking out at the thousands of faces. "I was supposed to prove to you that my species is dangerous, that we need collars to keep us from hurting ourselves. That is the narrative, isn't it? That humanity is the wild dog that needs a master." He reached up. His fingers didn't go to the latch of the collar, but to the seam of his collarbone, where he had tucked the hacking module beneath his shirt. With a quick jerk, he ripped the fabric, exposing the black metal of the device, plugged directly into the collar's maintenance port. A gasp went through the crowd. "But I am an engineer," Norman said. "And engineers like to look at the blueprints. We like to know how the machine was built." "Admiral," Margaret snapped, her voice losing its warmth. "Restrain your companion. He is malfunctioning." Marie stepped forward, but she didn't move toward Norman. She moved toward the main console of the stage, her hand hovering over the input controls. "My companion is functioning perfectly," Marie said, her voice amplified by her command authority. "He is simply accessing the public record. As an Admiral of the Third Claw, I authorize the use of the emergency broadcast channel." "You have no authority here," a felid counselor shouted from the front row. "I have the codes," Marie replied coolly, and she slammed her hand down on the console. The connection bridge Norman had built in the Vault of Originals, the one he had spent the last 4 hours decoding, flared to life. The massive holographic screen above them flickered. The images of happy pets vanished. Static roared for a second, and then a new image resolved. It was grainy, slightly desaturated, stamped with the time code from 50 years ago. The Grand Assembly Hall fell deathly silent. On the screen, 2 groups sat across a negotiation table. On one side was a massive Felid, his fur gray, with age wearing the robes of the High Chancellor. It was Lord Kale, a figure of legend. On the other side was a human delegation, and sitting at the head of the human table was a young woman with silver blonde hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. Margaret. "This is a fabrication," Margaret shrieked from the stage, her composure shattering. "Cut the feed, security, let it play," Norman said into the microphone. "Let them see how you saved us." On the screen, Lord Kale was speaking. His voice was deep rumbling, like distant thunder. "The Empire acknowledges the potential of the Terran species," Kale said. "You are aggressive, yes, but you are resilient. We offer you a seat at the lower council. You will be junior allies. You will retain your sovereignty, but you will demilitarize your warp capability for 100 years. It is a harsh term, but it is the price of peace." The entire hall gasped. History taught that the Felids had demanded unconditional surrender. History taught that the Felids had demanded the collars. On the screen, young Margaret leaned forward. She looked terrified, but her eyes were calculating. "Junior allies?" she asked. "That leaves us exposed. You have other enemies. If we are just allies, you might abandon us. Or you might decide later that we are a threat and wipe us out." "We do not break our treaties," Kale rumbled. "We cannot take that risk," young Margaret said. "We are weak. We need you to have a reason to keep us alive, a reason to protect us that goes beyond politics." She slid a datapad across the table. "We propose a different arrangement," she said. "Classification companion species. We will integrate into your society. We will be yours. If you own us, you will not fear us. If we are your pets, you will never look at us as rivals." Lord Kale looked at the datapad, his ears twitching in confusion. "You offer your people as property to buy safety." "We offer our pride to ensure our survival," Margaret said. "It is a strategic surrender. Better to be a live dog than a dead lion." The recording froze on Margaret's face, cold, pragmatic, and utterly devoid of faith in her own kind. Norman looked out at the hall. The silence was absolute. Humans were staring at the screen with mouths open. Felids looked at their own human companions with a sudden, dawning horror. They hadn't conquered a lesser species. They had been manipulated into becoming jailers by the prisoners themselves. "You lied," Norman said, turning to the real Margaret, who stood trembling on the stage. "The Felids didn't put the collars on us. You did. You were so afraid that we couldn't make it on our own. You sold us before we even tried." "I saved you," Margaret screamed. The mask was gone. Her face was twisted with 50 years of justified cowardice. "They would have killed us eventually. I bought us time, I bought us peace. Look at them, Norman. Look at these people. They are happy, they are fed, they are safe. "They are stunted!" Norman shouted back. "We are a species of explorers, of inventors, of dreamers. And you turned us into lapdogs because you didn't think we were good enough to sit at the table." "I did what I had to do." Margaret pulled a remote from her podium. Her thumb hovered over a red button. "And I will not let you destroy it. You want to be a martyr, Norman, fine." She pressed the button. It was the activation signal for the safety measure in Norman's collar. A neurospike designed to overload the pain receptors, causing immediate, incapacitating agony. Norman flinched, bracing for the fire in his veins. Nothing happened. Instead, the holographic screen behind him shifted again. "Did you really think," Marie's voice cut through the tension, "that I would let you keep a weapon pointed at my engineer's head?" Norman looked at Marie. She was smiling, a sharp, feral grin. "We reconfigured the receiver," Norman said to Margaret. "The signal didn't go to my nervous system. It went to the main server." On the screen, a cascade of documents and audio logs began to scroll. "Transfer 5 million credits to True Humanity via Aegis Shell Corp." Audio log: "Ensure the explosion in Sector 4 causes panic but keep casualties low. We need them scared, not dead." Email: "If the Admiral's pet becomes a problem, initiate the feral protocol. Blame it on genetic instability." It was a flood of evidence. Every bribe, every threat, every credit funneled to the terrorists she claimed to fight. "You funded the terrorists," Norman said, his voice cold. "You paid people to bomb your own station just to prove that we need you to protect us. You are not a savior, Margaret. You are a warden who starts fires just to put them out." The crowd erupted. It wasn't the chaotic riot Margaret had planned. It was a unified roar of betrayal. Felid guards were moving toward the stage, not to arrest Norman, but to encircle Margaret. Margaret backed away, looking at the sea of angry faces. She looked at Norman. "You have destroyed us. Without the Accord, they will eat us alive." Norman looked at her. He thought of his parents, dragged away to pay a debt. He thought of the years of humiliation, of the shame of the collar. He had the power right now to incite a mob. He could point a finger and have her torn apart. But he looked at Marie. He saw the way she stood ready to defend him against an entire empire. "Revenge would be easy," Norman said into the microphone. The hall quieted to hear him. "It would be so easy to hate you, to hate the Felids, to burn this station down." He reached up and unlatched the mechanism of his collar. He didn't take it off yet. He just held it there loose against his skin. "But we deserve more than another cage built from hate," Norman said. "We are not pets, and we are not enemies." He looked at the Felid High Counselors in the front row. "We are ready to take the seat you offered 50 years ago," Norman said. "I propose we dissolve the pet accord. No more companions. No more owners. We want an alliance accord. We keep the medical protection. We keep the open borders. But we tear up the property deeds. We stand as equals, or we don't stand at all." A heavy silence followed. It was a terrifying proposition. It meant undoing the foundation of their society. Then Marie stepped forward. She walked to the edge of the stage. She looked at her crew, hundreds of Felid officers, and their human companions sitting in the gallery. "Command override authorization Marie 1 Alpha," she boomed. "Effective immediately, all registered humans aboard the HSS Starfang are reclassified." She looked at Norman. "Status crew associate, rank lieutenant, salary standard alliance grade, rights full citizenship." She ripped the golden badge of owner from her uniform and threw it on the floor. "I will not command a ship of slaves," she declared. "Who stands with me?" For a second, nothing happened. Then, in the gallery, a young Felid ensign stood up. He reached over to the human sitting next to him and unclasped the leash connecting them. "I stand with the Admiral," the ensign shouted, his voice cracking. Then another, and another. A Felid captain in the third row stood up. A diplomat from the Aquarian sector stood up. The sound of applause started slowly, then built into a thunderous roar. It was the sound of a dam breaking. The conservatives were shouting, protesting, but they were drowned out by the sheer volume of relief. Margaret stood alone in the center of the storm. Two felid security officers stepped onto the stage. "High Commissioner," the officer said politely. "We have some questions regarding the funding of terrorist activities. Please come with us." Margaret looked at Norman one last time. She didn't look angry anymore. She just looked old and small. "I tried," she whispered. "I know," Norman said. "But you tried to save a memory. We are trying to build a future." She was led away. Norman looked at Marie. The chaos of the hall seemed to fade into the background. She was breathing hard. Her fur ruffled, her eyes bright. "Lieutenant Hale," she said, testing the title. "That was a hell of a speech." "I had a good windmilling," Norman said. "I didn't want to get shocked." "I disabled the shocker 3 days ago," Marie smirked. "You what?" "Never mind," she said, grabbing his arm. "Let's get out of here before they ask us to sign anything else." 3 weeks later, the HSS Starfang sat in high orbit above the Crown Ring, its engines humming with the preparation for departure. The ship looked the same, but the atmosphere inside was entirely different. The collars were gone. Or rather, they had changed. Some humans still wore them as fashion statements, stripped of all tracking and paint technology. Others had thrown them into the recyclers. The pet decks had been converted into crew quarters. In the Admiral's cabin, the air was quiet. Norman sat on the basking ledge, his legs dangling over the edge. He was wearing a standard Alliance flight suit, the gray fabric crisp and new. On his collarbone, the skin was pale where the metal band had been for so long. Marie was at her desk signing the last of the transfer orders. She looked up and caught him watching her. "Stop staring, Lieutenant," she said, though there was no bite in her voice. "It is insubordinate." "I am not staring," Norman said. "I am observing." "Observing what?" "The way you keep twitching your tail." "You are nervous." Marie sighed and put down the stylus. She swiveled her chair around. "We are about to launch on the first joint command mission in history. Half the fleet thinks we will mutiny within a week. The other half is betting on whether we crash into a moon. Yes, I am nervous." Norman hopped down from the ledge. He walked over to her. The invisible barrier that had always existed between them, the wall of owner and property, was gone. The floor felt different under his feet. He walked as a free man. "We won't crash," Norman said. "I recalibrated the navcoms myself. And the crew, they are good. They are learning how to talk to each other without a translator, filtering everything through a master-servant dialect." "It will take time," Marie said. 50 years of habit is hard to break." "We have time," Norman said. He leaned against the desk, crossing his arms. He looked at her. Really looked at her. The way the light from the viewport caught the sleek black fur of her face, the intelligence in her eyes, the strength in her shoulders. And inevitably, his eyes drifted as she stood up and turned toward the window. "Admiral," Norman said. "Marie," she corrected automatically. "Marie," Norman smiled. "I have a personnel matter to discuss." "Is it about the roster?" she asked, looking out at the stars. "No, it is a formal complaint." Marie turned back, her ears perked. "A complaint? Has someone mistreated you? If anyone has, no. Norman waved a hand. "It is a complaint about myself. You see, I seem to be having a problem with workplace conduct." "Explain." Norman stepped closer. He was now standing right in front of her. He could smell the lavender and the ozone. "I find myself distracted," Norman said, "by my superior officer." Marie went very still. Her tail stopped moving. "Distracted how?" Norman grinned. It was the same reckless grin he had worn on the bridge the day they met, right before he slipped on the juice. "Well," he said, "I still think your butt looks cute. And now that I am not your pet anymore, I would like to file a formal inquiry into whether I am allowed to have feelings for my former owner." Marie stared at him. For a moment he thought he had pushed it too far. Her eyes widened, her ears flicked back. Then a low, rumbling sound started in her chest. A purr. "You are insufferable," she growled softly. "I am honest," Norman countered. "You are lucky I cannot legally have you flogged anymore," she said, fighting a smile. "So is that a denial of the inquiry?" Marie rolled her eyes. "The inquiry is pending review." She reached out. Her hand, with its sharp, retractable claws, came up to his neck. But instead of grabbing a collar, her fingers brushed against his skin, tracing the line of his jaw. The touch was electric. "However," she whispered, leaning down until her face was inches from his, "I suppose we can conduct a field test to gather more data." "A field test sounds appropriate," Norman whispered. She closed the distance. The kiss was not like in the human movies. It was strange, rough, ticklish with whiskers, and overwhelming. She tasted like power, and something uniquely her. Norman wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her close, burying his hands in the soft fur of her back. She made a sound that was half gasp, half growl, and her tail wrapped tightly around his leg, anchoring him to her. It lasted for a long time. When they finally broke apart, Norman was breathless. Marie's ears were flushed a deep pink inside. "Data analysis," she asked, her voice breathless. "Conclusive," Norman said. "Very conclusive." The comms unit on the desk beeped. "Admiral," the helmsman's voice crackled. "We are cleared for departure. Vector set for the outer rim. Standing by for your command." Marie cleared her throat. She smoothed her uniform, trying to regain her composure. She looked at Norman. "Take your station, Lieutenant," she said. Norman snapped a salute. It was crisp, perfect, and completely respectful. "Aye, Admiral." He turned to leave. He walked to the door, feeling lighter than air. "Norman," she called out. He stopped and looked back. Marie was standing by the viewport, the stars framing her silhouette. She looked every inch the commander of the most powerful ship in the fleet. "If you ever call my butt cute in front of the High Council again," she said, her eyes narrowing playfully, "I will put you in a crate." Norman laughed. "Understood, Marie. Understood." He walked out onto the bridge. The crew was waiting, human and Felid sitting side by side. The tension was gone, replaced by the hum of 1,000 possibilities. Norman sat at his engineering station. He looked at the main screen where the crown ring was shrinking into a speck of light. He touched his neck one last time, feeling the phantom weight of the collar, and then let it go. "Engage," Marie's voice rang out over the speakers. The Starfang leaped forward, streaking into the void, no longer a cage but a chariot, And Norman Hale, the man who had slipped and fallen into a revolution, smiled as the stars turned into lines of infinite light. The universe was vast, dangerous, and unknown. But for the first time in 50 years, humanity was facing it, standing up. And the Admiral did have a really cute butt. The end.